Ahsoka is now airing all 8 episodes on Disney Plus. Now, before we get into this review, there's two things that you gotta know. I gotta set the foundation for this review. This is gonna be a spoiler review. The show's out, all the episodes are out. I'm sure if you're watching this, you've already watched Ahsoka and you just want to hear someone else's thoughts on it. So I'm just gonna talk spoiler free with Ahsoka. I don't want to be handcuffed to a non-spoiler review for this. Also, the foundation for this also has to be said. I've never seen Rebels. I've never watched that show. I've seen the Clone Wars movies and maybe a handful of the Clone Wars episodes, so I have a little bit of an idea of the Anakin and Ahsoka relationship from that. Other than that, Ahsoka was completely fresh and new to me. These characters were new to me. This whole world, this side of Star Wars was new to me. So how was this for someone who's never watched Rebels? Honestly, for the first couple episodes, I would say for the first 4, maybe stretch it to 5 episodes, I felt the show had a pretty good balance of introducing these characters to a new audience while also appeasing those who have watched Rebels. My brother is a die-hard Clone Wars and Rebels fan, so I can tell you from his experience that this definitely works for Rebels and Clone Wars fans, because he was geeking out almost every week at the Easter eggs and the references and all that stuff that was coming out of these people's mouths and what was on screen. I didn't pick up on all of those. I didn't pick up on many of those, as a matter of fact. So I will say, though, that later on in the show, around midway point maybe of episode 5 or beyond episode 5, the balance started to get a little bit more uneven. I did find myself feeling a bit more lost in this world, a bit more lost of what was really going on. The whole show, the whole season is setting up where they're looking for these characters, Thrawn and Ezra. Apparently at the end of Rebels, the show, these characters disappeared. No one really knows where they went. And Ahsoka, Sabine, her friends, they're trying to find Thrawn and Ezra. Now, did I know who Thrawn and Ezra were when I started this show? I had no freaking clue who these people were. And the whole show is kind of building this mystery of where did they go? Who are they? And I did find myself to be a little bit intrigued in the beginning of the show for those characters. Now, when those characters do show up, when Thrawn shows up and Ezra shows up, it's a little lackluster to me, honestly, because they build them up so much. They build up these relationships. They build up this threat to the point that when Thrawn actually shows up on screen, I was kind of into his character. I thought some of his dialogue worked really well. He was always one step ahead of the characters. That's how he was presented. I kind of found that really cool. But honestly, the villains in this show that really stuck out to me were these new characters, Baylan and Shin. Now, these characters, they don't get enough shine in this show as much as they should, especially Baylan, who's played by the now, unfortunately, rest in peace, Ray Stevenson. He stole the show. He was the MVP of the show. The way that he held himself, he was always very calm. He always felt like he was in control. He felt like more of a commanding presence than Thrawn ever did to me, to be honest with you guys. And when it comes to our main characters that we're following, Ahsoka and Sabine and Hera and all those people, I can't ever say that I really cared that much about them. I think a big problem with those characters for me is the fact that, Star Wars has always had these crazy worlds and aliens and creatures, but there's always been this humanity to them. And I felt like these characters, this might sound weird to say, but these characters kind of lacked humanity. I'll give you a big example that really bothered me. The whole show is building up to Ezra. We got to find Ezra. Apparently Sabine and this Ezra character, really close relationship. She misses him terribly. So this whole show, Sabine is like, Ezra, I gotta find Ezra. Is Ezra still alive? Ezra. And then they finally find this Ezra character, and there's like no emotion. It's like, hug the freaking guy, for crying out loud. She looks at him, she smiles, she might get a little snarky. Maybe that's her character in Rebels, I don't know. But for me, that was a big disappointment. When they finally found him. Ahsoka, she's very stoic. A lot of the characters are stoic. A lot of the characters feel kind of stilted to me as you watch this episode. They never really feel like they give these characters any chance of getting vulnerable, of letting their walls down, of letting the audience really get inside these characters and get inside their heads and see these characters at a breaking point or at a vulnerable stage. They're just always so stoic. They're always so stilted. They never really felt like there was danger. They never really felt like there was urgency to any situation. Now, what the show does have going for it is some really fun fan service. Now, you're either going to hear that word fan service and think to yourself, that sounds awful, not into that, or you're going to hear the word fan service and be like, I'm a fan, service me. And dude, any time Anakin Skywalker was on the screen. When they brought Hayden Christensen back, which I did not expect to have that much Hayden Christensen. He shows up at the end of episode 4, almost the entirety of episode 5. He pops up again in episode 7, and he's at the end of episode 8. We finally get to see the Force ghost of him at the end of episode 8. Loved every second of it. I thought Hayden Christensen did a great job playing off of Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka as well. This felt like his redemption. It was great. There's an episode where we see C-3PO show up as well as the spokesperson for Leia. I felt like the cameos and what people would call the member berries of the show, they were used well because they were used in a narrative way. Now, going on to some more of my negatives with the show, I do think the show has very clunky writing. I feel like a lot of the show had moments where characters made illogical decisions. They made decisions that didn't really feel like these characters are this dumb. They shouldn't make these decisions. There were some characters in here, honestly, that just felt like they were just filling up the page of the script. I did not feel like they needed to be in the show as much as they were in the show. I feel like there could have been more time dedicated to something more important, like Hera and her son Jason, for example. I don't really know why Jason was even introduced in this show. He disappears after 2 episodes, and it feels like they were setting up something for him, but then it never comes to fruition. It was kind of weird. And I feel like the show also had some of the sloppiest and worst work of the volume of all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows. There were so many times in this show where you can see the place where the soundstage and the screens that are projecting the environment around the actors where they meet, and it just it pulls me out of the show, first of all, and it just looks sloppy. And there was also some choreographed fighting in this that was kind of sloppy looking as well. In episode 4, Ahsoka has this fight with Baylan, and I don't know, there was something about the choreography, the way that they moved. It just felt like it was something was off with the choreography for me. So to wrap up my thoughts on Ahsoka, what I will say about the show is that I found it consistently fine. Every time I watched the show, I was waiting for that moment. I was waiting for that episode where I went from, I like this, to this is great, I'm loving this show. And I never got that episode. I got those moments, like I mentioned, Anakin, anytime he popped up, I got super amped. Episode 5, all the stuff with Anakin and that, with the Clone Wars flashbacks. I mean, that was a lot of fun. That was great to see. But other than that, the show always just had this tone, this consistent tone that always just felt kind of, this show is okay. Like, there's not really an episode, maybe episode 4, maybe parts of episode 5 that I would go back and watch again. But as a whole, now that we've gotten the full picture of season 1, I don't really feel like I want to rewatch this entire show again. All in all, I would say if you are a massive Clone Wars fan, if you are a Rebels fan, you're going to probably love this show. There's a lot here. There's a lot of references. There's a lot of Easter eggs for you to check out. So I'm sure you'll have fun with that. If you're like me and you've never watched Rebels and you've never watched Clone Wars, I would say that it is a show that is watchable. I think there's some amazing moments, but I don't think much of the characters or even the storyline is going to hook you that intensely. So for those Clone Wars and Rebels fans, I guess I would give this a strong recommend just based on my brother's enthusiasm. But for me, if you're like me and you've never watched these shows before, I'm going to give Ahsoka a weak recommend.